Okay. Good morning and Jai Hind to all. I'm Kalpana Yadav, Assistant Professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religion. First of all, I request Professor Rakesh Chandra sir and Rahul Kumar Maurya to please come on the dais. And they are already here. So, and I welcome Dr. Shilpi Srivastava and Saurabh Todaria, who are connected online. Are they? And we know that this session is being presided by Sir Professor Rakesh Chandra. So I request Rakesh Chandra, sir, to please conduct the session. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. On We begin the session today, the last day of this very important seminar, with three papers. The first paper is to be presented by, it's a joint paper by Dr. Rahul Kumar Maurya, uh, our organizer, and Dr. Sanjeev Pandey. The paper is titled Why Truth Cannot Be Emancipatory. Dr. Rahul Kumar Maurya obtained his MPhil and PhD degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2011 and 2016, respectively. He's currently an assistant professor at the Banaras Hindu University. And prior to that, he has worked in the University of Delhi and Janki Devi Memorial College, associated with Delhi University. He has also been a visiting faculty at Amity Noida. His areas of specialization include philosophy of language, epistemology, metaphysics, and contemporary pragmatism. He also has interests in logic, critical thinking, social and political philosophy, and ethics. Dr. Maurya is currently working on a research project, Anti-Foundationalism, Roti, Putnam, and Buddhism, sponsored by the Institution of Eminence. He has also been the resource person and an invited speaker at various institutions. His the co-author of the paper, Dr. Sanjeev Pandey, is from the Department of Political Science. He got his PhD from the University of Lucknow. He's an assistant professor at the GUPG College, Bareilly, and his areas of interest are critical theory and Western Marxism.
Honorable Chair, Professor Rakesh Chandra, and the dignitaries and the learned scholars in the audience, and the research scholars and friends. Uh, Let me at the very outset acknowledge that I have not been able to write a full-fledged paper. This entire 1 month, I have been completely occupied in these organizational activities. And yet, the paper that I'm going to present, though it has been thought jointly with Dr. Sanjeev Pandey, and I have been also thinking about it for a long time. But I think whatever I'm going to present now, it still needs more thought on it. It needs to be more organized, and very important reference need to be given. So this is very working, and I would say very sketchy draft, but let me think loudly through you so that we can further make it more uh, arguably tenable paper. So this idea that why truth cannot be emancipatory, let me just first give you the brief abstract that I have put so that I can set the stage of my presentation, right? The absolutist thinking in philosophy since Plato until Kant has been dominantly present in Western philosophical tradition. This absolutist framework of thinking or idealization has two problems. One, it rules out any alteration or change in it, even if it is very pressing from different time and context. Another, it leaves no scope for thinking, hence converting human beings into human automata. No conversation is possible between the two absolute or absolutist or the universalist system of thought. The slogan Kant raised in his professed enlightenment was to save the people from this allegedly human automata. In this paper, I shall try to understand how Kant's Enlightenment project has succumbed to his own artifice of reason. In order to restore the professed goal of the Enlightenment and its glory, pragmatist enlightenment, which Putnam and Rorty speaks for, may become inevitable. So I'm going to look for that enlightenment project which Kant has professed in his enlightenment. But before we come to this enlightenment, let me just deal the beginning of it, how it has actually how Kant has reached to this point. The critique of pure reason, right, which seems that Kant has been the critical of pure reason, because before him it was all speculative metaphysics, be it Plato or Descartes or Spinoza. They were all doing a kind of philosophy which is nothing but a metaphysical enterprise, a priori ahistorical enterprise. So Kant tried, after reading Hume, Kant tried to put a stop to this and said that rational metaphysics is impossible. And he said, I mean, the reason in Immanuel Kant has two readings. One, I would quote from Popper, Karl Popper, and another by P.F. Strawson. Karl Popper is saying that in the project of critique of pure reason is nothing but critiquing the pure reason itself and bringing the constraints from empirical instantiations. So those very concepts of understanding or concepts of reason that which has a priori status needs to be applied on a concrete uh, concrete experiences. Without that, they are almost meaningless, right? And that famous line about Kant, that concepts without percepts are empty and percepts without concepts are blind. So it seems that Karl Popper is saying that this, in Immanuel Kant, this pure reason has been put under the restriction, right? So that it cannot take a free flight as it has been taking in the speculative traditions, and where that speculative or metaphysical tradition used to talk about metaphysical entities, which Kant is saying that the knowledge of the metaphysical entities is not possible. In a way, he has restricted the scope of Kantian, I mean, that pure region. This is one reading. Though Peter Strawson is reading differently. He's saying, though Kant has attempted to bring certain restriction on pure region, but actually he has succumbed to his own professed goal. It wasn't possible. And why it wasn't possible to bring certain restriction on pure region is coming from dualities which started taking shape in Plato from the very beginning. So Plato talked about the duality between universal and particulars. The same kind of duality we can see in Descartes when he talks about mind and body. And the similar duality we see in Immanuel Kant in terms of region and sense experience. Now, you can very easily see that these two uh, categories, right, seems to be radically different, right? And that's why it is very, I mean, Plato was also wrong about it when he's saying that the particulars can realize their existence by participating into the very idea, the very form of it. But I think since they are quite radically different, right, there is no point of appropriation possible. You can never reach to the form. Similarly, Descartes has also failed in bringing the symmetry between mind and body, and he failed to explain how mind and body interact with each other. And so Kant has also miserably failed when he's saying, no, the concepts of understanding can be applied, right, on the very individual experiences. Now, the point is the individual experiences are contingent experiences where the form, the nature of concept seems to be very universal because it is a priori, it is ahistorical. So either you have to accept that your sense experience is nothing but what your concepts of region are. So they lose their status and get absorbed into what is the nature of understanding or the region is. Or you have to say the regions have lost their status and they have become very individualized experiences, as what Kant is talking about. So here I would go by what Peter Stawson says, that though Kant would not acknowledge, right, but he is more like Berkeleyan idealist, I mean subjective idealist than he acknowledges. So I think that there is no problem into this. Having this subjective role of region is very important. But then this should not be subjective connected to the individualize or individualization of it. Rather, this subjectivity, if it is diffused into the community at large, then the threat of being completely individualistic or being lost into what we call solipsistic situation will also be completely uh, uh, gotten rid of. But then the problem is that Kant thought that by bringing certain restrictions to region, he can make a kind of synthesis, which he couldn't. Rather, the idea of the Enlightenment was, because there was an excessive uh, role of religion, and you all see that this entire metaphysical tradition in philosophy is nothing but echoing those absolutist framework of thinking which different fortified religions have already professed. So in the religions they have a kind of holistic system of thought, right, within which, I mean, there is no progress, no change is allowed, because they are complete, they are completely universalistic. So now, once certain system of such a absolutist thought has been produced, no progress, no objection, no criticism becomes possible. So that kind of absolutist tendency has been taken forward by the philosophical metaphysical systems as well. And then something that Kant rebel against could not be completely eliminated, right? So his idea was that since the religions have been very heavily coming upon the individuals and left no scope for individuals to think for themselves, to make projects, to make goals, right, to create meanings for their lives, and that's why these religions have to be eliminated from the public life and let the region take its own course. That individual freedom became very important for Immanuel Kant. But then this individual freedom, which was very central to the Enlightenment project, somehow uh, Kant has knowingly or unknowingly has sacrificed that, because by understanding region as a priori ahistorical, he has again replaced the very absolutist idea of God by region itself. So something which, I mean, the God has been almost sovereign in the religious framework. Now this region became almost sovereign, and it is universally available to everyone, right? And that's why whatever region can think of, it can think at a time universally, and there cannot be any progress, any criticism possible. So I think the very idea of human freedom, which was very central to Enlightenment project, has been somehow been succumbed to this idea of uh, the idea which this region with capital R, Kant has thought about. Now, this in the metaphysical system, as I said, and I'm making a comparison between this in the objectivity and in the subjectivity. I would go by this subjective freedom, right, and not subjective freedom attached to individual peoples, but intersubjectivity kind of thing, right? So this individual freedom to construct knowledge, to create knowledge is very important. If you're saying that nature will impress its own structures, own objectivity upon you, and you just become passive receiver of it. And that is where your role, your active role into creating a knowledge, constructing a knowledge, has been completely abdicated. And then there is no sense of responsibility. Suppose if I happen to be absolutist, and if I make a certain goal for human beings at large, and I would say, no, this is not how I think, this is what the reality is. And once that kind of project has come into existence, you have no right to criticize it. Or even you cannot also later on challenge me if later on human beings discover, no, that happened to be very unfulfilling for human beings. Rather, it has gone against the human freedom, right? Now I don't have to take responsibility. Why? Because I have not created it. This is how the nature has impressed upon it. I happen to be only passive receiver. But if I say that I have a constructed ontological reality, not individually, but as a community at large, then whatever philosophical thought that we have produced or certain human project that we have created, if later on certain inadequacies are discovered, we have to take responsibility, and we must be ready to negotiate, to argue, and if the need be, we have to be ready to accept the changes and make the progress. Now, this is where the idea of human progress and the sense of responsibility becomes important. And if you carefully see the way the religions have been somehow perpetuated many kinds of social ills that we think now social ills, they might not have been social ills the time they came into existence, and a kind of universalistic thought. Like, once you accept everything what Descartes has talked about, there is no progress allowed in it, right? Because it is a kind of thought totalizing system, right? And there is no possibility of error allowed. But going by the very human experiences, it is quite natural that we cannot rise above our human contingencies. Our region is not a priori, it is evolving into the culture, into the history, into the language games, right? So the sort of objectivity, the absolute objectivity which these philosophical systems have been looking for is very deceptive. It cannot be had, right? So I think Rorty or somebody else said that philosophy always tries to get episteme, to reach to the episteme, but at the end only opinions are had, right? So that very a priori ahistorical enterprise which these philosophers or philosophical systems have been making have been very problematic for human beings at large. And we have seen different kinds of so-called social and political problems have been there. Why? Because they got ossified, right, into our culture, because we thought that this is what the people have realized, the ultimate reality, and we have to only follow it. That means the human intelligence and rational deliberations become redundant if one absolutist system has come into force, come into existence. Then what is the role, what is the purpose of our intelligence? Why can't we take it further, taking our own situations, our own aspirations, our own imaginations, right? So I think this more humanistic and pragmatist idea, which Hilary Putnam and Richard Rorty, they are all talking about, becomes very important. And this is where I would also like to bring certain discussion on moral discourse. Like, if you go by what Kant had said, right, that there are absolute moral principles, there are categorical moral principles. Dewey and many others would say there are, I mean, these absolutist and very abstract and general principles do not help us at all to navigate your life into concrete situations, right? You have to have your own wisdom by your experiences, how to navigate your own life into the real situations, right? And something that they call good in terms of goodwill is a very hollow concept. Dewey would say, no, the idea of good cannot be estranged from your aspirations, your material goods, your economic goods. I mean, until unless you think of something good in terms of your purposes, your aspirations, and what are the resources that you have, right? Otherwise, you can say, no, I have a good will for you, but then it does nothing in terms of getting the real change into your life. And this is where the Putnam and Richard Rorty becomes very important. And they are also drawing a lot from John Dewey, because John Dewey would say that we cannot make sense of having or dividing our moral realm into two domain. One as being absolutely objectively good, and another being absolutely objectively bad, right? So this idea of good and bad, this kind of divide, is not working out well. Dewey would say that evil is nothing but a rejected good. There's something that in our history we accepted as good, since there was a kind of a concurrence, there was a kind of agreement from the people. People accepted, people followed it. But later on, when the people's aspirations got changed, they rebel against it. They're saying, no, we will not accept it. And that is how people started increasingly seeing that it has something bad. Why? Because then it was not fulfilling your increased or your revised aspirations. And then something that happened to be good for some time, right, became bad. And that is how you can also make the sense of moral progress. How would you have the sense of morally progressing? Otherwise, whatever had been taught into philosophical system, right, will be perpetuated for infinite, and there cannot be any change. And what we have seen and witnessed in the history of Western philosophical system, that each philosopher, the succeeding philosopher, has replaced the previous absolutist system by another absolutist system. It is not that they have not been critical of, but they have been producing another absolutist system and replacing the previous preceding one. So they have not incorporated the very human fallibility within it. And when I'm saying human fallibility, I'm not saying that we will change it every next moment, right? The historical progresses take historical time. So I'm not saying that something that we have thought of good for us, I'm going to immediately change in the next moment. Many people would say, no, then, I mean, you are relativizing it, and then it becomes subjective to individuals. No, even you do not know what is good and what is bad until unless you make agreement among other human beings. Right? So there must be a kind of conversation, there must be a kind of agreement among others. And that is how, I mean, see, suppose if I say this is chair individually, right? If I'm not taking others into account, then I might be wrong. It might be a table, it might be something else. And if everybody also agrees to this idea that this is chair, then that is how you have to go about it. And another is that if it is working for your purposes, then it is good. If it is not working for your aspirations, for your purposes, then you will not accept it. So this human freedom is very important, which even Immanuel Kant has thought about. But then when he brought in that subjectivity, it did not remain subjectivity, right? Which is also a kind of evolving and dynamic. He presupposed that a priori framework, and by assuming that a priori a historical framework, he again became a kind of absolutist. And that is where the very imagined human freedom is also lost, right? And that is where I would say even Hilary Putnam and Robert Brandom, they are talking about second enlightenment, the enlightenment which pragmatist philosophers are saying. That the one was the enlightenment which Kant visualized, and it also served certain purposes, because by that time Christianity was so powerful that human beings were not allowed to say anything that goes against the Catholic principles. And that's why he tried to restore individual freedom, but then it did not went very long, and it again succumbed to the same kind of absolutist and metaphysical framework. So now these philosophers are saying we have to uh, discuss and invent the second enlightenment, where this individual freedom remains very centric, right? And that's why I was just reading one interview, the collection of interview of Richard Rorty, which is titled as "Take Care of Freedom and the Truth Will Take Care of Itself," where there is one interview titled as "After Philosophy, Democracy," right? So I think I would not subscribe that this philosophical enterprise is completely done away with, but this very a priori enterprise assumed in philosophical uh, arena is not very good one. Rather, it has to be seen as evolving, dynamic, and progressing, so that you can uh, still be committed to the individual freedom, right? And even if we are making any mistakes, that would be the mistakes of collective, not the individual. But in an absolutist framework, nobody is responsible for any ills that happens, right? Or even if later on you discover this is not good, or this has been not uh, the fulfilling way of saying. I mean, the Rorty is not interested in saying that the previous way of living a life happened to be bad. Now we have reached very closer to the good or to the objective truth. Rather, you would say the current vocabulary of understanding our life and organizing our life is more fulfilling to your aspirations. Not that we have reached to the truth and the preceding people or the cultures were actually tied down to the very, what should I say, their individual feelings, and they were not making a kind of philosophical deliberation. He would say that this this a priori enterprise is not possible, and we cannot have this absolutist and universalistic thinking. So even our moral truths are also not final, right? And they will be always linked with the human aspirations or the communities. And so he's saying that this, I mean, this is also possible that not that everybody in this cosmos at a time will have same kind of thinking. And that's why there must be a conversation going on, right? You cannot also keep yourself inward within your own framework of thinking. You have to have a conversation. And the idea that Richard Rorty is relativist is also not very tenable. I tried to read carefully Richard Rorty, and he's being denying this charge of being relativist. He's saying he's not. But he's saying that the sense of objectivity that metaphysicians have been invoking is not correct. The sense of objectivity will come from the people, from the community. And then he is taking this ethnocentric stance. He's saying this objectivity will ever try to widen its scope by making one ethnic group, right? So you will not remain compartmentalized into a different communities and not having any conversation. So we will, I mean, we will have to have a conversation with other nations as being one nation in itself, right? And that is how we are negotiating, we are changing our values. So this idea of objectivity, the way it has been taught traditionally, is not being accepted by Richard Rorty and pragmatists. I mean, for Richard Rorty, this idea of human freedom is very important. And that's why he is very critical of the idea of truth being discovered. Truth is not waiting outside to be discovered. He's saying, rather he would not say that we are inventing, but he's saying if you're very keen to say truth is discovered, he would take another side and say, no, we invent the truths. Though there are not truths for him, but he's being satirical and saying, no, we invent the truth, depending on what is your cultural, your linguistic background is. So I would also like to a bit talk about what Bilgami was saying in his lecture, that the relativism is fine, right? And we can have a conversation. I mean, there can be a plurality. I mean, if the issues are not so important for us as a community at large, then it's fine, right? It's fine what kinds of clothes you want to wear. It's fine what kinds of food you want to eat. But if your set of belief is really restricting my freedom, that is where it comes into class. And then if you are having absolutist framework, there will not be any conversation. One has to surrender to the other, right? Two cannot go. And that's why you can see many of the philosophical systems have a violent fight, right? Like the Vaishnavite and Saivite, they have a violent fight saying, no, we are right, you are not, right? And that's why Richard Rorty is saying that it is very fascinating to say that we are rational human beings, right? We are rational animals, defining ourselves as rational animals, right? But when it comes, who is rational and who is not, then I'm keeping you out. No, 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 no. You don't show the traits of being rational, so you are not rational. First, we have said being human is rational. Then, if you are wearing certain kinds of clothes, then you are not rational. Maybe if you are female, then you are not rational. Maybe if you belong to the Middle East countries, then you are not rational. So this idea of this universalistic framework of region, right, is not serving our purposes, right? And that's why he also says that we do not require moral absolutist principles, right? He is saying that when it comes to save your own child, right, who is very loved one, dear to you, you do not recall yourself any categorical moral principle. No, no, no. You need to be loyal to that categorical moral principle, and that's why I have to help you. That's why I have to help my child, right? But he's saying that is how you are sentimentally and emotionally connected. That is how you are immediately driven to get help to your child, right? And when it comes to help to others, right, then there is a moral principle. That's why you need to think about helping others. But then that very abstruse and abstract moral principles will never get you moved into action. What gets you moved into action is your emotional connect, your human sentiments. And that's why Richard Rorty has drawn a lot from human moral sentiments. He's saying that this being rational, being rationally, morally human beings will not help you really being moral into your real life, right? So he is focusing on a kind of education, literature, which can change our sensibilities, right? Which can make us really human and moral into your emotions and feelings. And once you are emotionally connected, once the horizon of your loved ones and your family and friends become wider, you don't need to think about any moral principles. And as long as you have to think about moral principles to go into action, you will never go into action. And that's why whenever we see human tragedies on the newspapers, we just go on simply turning the pages. It doesn't make much affected. But when I lose my loved one, right, I can't manage my life for a couple of days or maybe weeks or months, right? Sometimes people lose sense of the life. So that's why I think this human sensibility, right, becomes very important. And then some people would say, no, that human feelings could be very subjective, right? And then the preferences could be subjectivized to the individuals. But then Rorty is restoring a kind of community objectivity by saying that you have to enlarge yourself where you have a similar feelings to everyone. Otherwise, of course, there is a threat looming large if you are not inculcating your human moral sentiments, right? And this is where I think that human freedom and sense of responsibility becomes very important. The truths which have been found out, discovered, right, in an absolutist framework, they happen to be coercive upon human beings. They have ruthlessly ruined the human freedom. And we cannot go by that absolutist framework of thinking, right? We need to have that human freedom. So if I'm thinking of certain kinds of human project, right? If later on, by new emerged situations, right, if it is not going well with that, then I will be ready to accept, or no, no, now it is not working well, I have to change it. Right? And that's why there is also sense of freedom restored, and there is a worth to individuals that you can make realize your worth being human. Otherwise, somebody will come and say, no, no, I have realized the truth for everybody else, and now you just follow it. And that could be right, that could be wrong. I mean, this is I wrote in 2012. I wrote one paper on Gandhi, saying that why does Gandhi's uh, the concept of self lead to moral fanaticism, right? And if you are absolutist, I'm not saying that you might be wrong every time, but then there is a threat that you will become fanatic. If you're saying, no, 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 I have thought about it, and this is absolutely, this is right, then I will not accept your criticisms, right? I may risk my life to defend myself, and that's what the Gandhi did against Ambedkar. He was ready to kill himself, but not to negotiate democratically, because he was so convinced that I'm right in my framework of thinking. And so was Nathuram Godse. He was also absolutist in his framework of thinking, but he wasn't ready to kill himself. He killed Gandhi. So this is where I would say that the truth in an absolutist framework cannot be emancipatory. So I would rest my case here. Thank you for listening. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In terms of interpretation of the scholars from Kant to Strawson to Rorty, uh, uh, what would the House advise? Should we take the three papers and questions together? Individually. Okay. So the paper is open to question. Yes, please.
Hello, sir. I think you have given answer, but I have framed question. Sir, you are denying absolute truth. What do you think? Why this absolute truth were created or came into existence? In my experience, we are governed by some absolute truth. Everyone has logic and reason for every absolute truth, and they are 101% convinced by that. For some examples, uh, uh, Hindustan is not for Muslims. Varna system is very good structure. Reservation is against merit. Witch hunting is not bad. Females are biologically weak. What are the reasons and the solution you think? And is there any role of a state or administration behind it? Thank you, sir.
It comes from ratio. The rational word comes from ratio, which is the characteristics of the mind. It always compares something to something. So just a theoretical observation from whatever I've been learning for the last 2 days is that being absolute is the real philosophy. Being rational is more scientific and mathematical. What do you think?
So the big question which Dr. Rahul has raised is very much close to my heart. And when Friedrich Nietzsche write in the Twilight of Idol, when truth finally become the fable, I think this anti-foundationalist approach is very much prevalent nowadays in the, philosophical consciousness. So I find that there is also a foundation in your thesis, which is freedom. You think that freedom is a foundation upon which we need to, build up our thesis or our thinking. And even if we read Kantian essay, What is Enlightenment, or K.C. Bhattacharya's idea of Swarajina ideas, I find that they would not agree with your essay, and they would definitely gonna agree in one way or another. This is one critique. And another way, when we look at the lecture of Professor R.C. Pradhan and Professor Nirmal Narayan Chakrabarti, we find that there are possibility we may look upon the idea of absolute in a different way. And if you look at K.C. Bhattacharya's idea of alternative forms of absolute, we find that we may have a different perspective to look upon the idea of absolute, and it is not something that is quite religious in a theological sense. Philosophy has a different domain, upon looking the idea of absolute and so on. Thank you.
Uh, I have just a observation. In Kant, for example, the freedom of the individual is not lost, even if you are right on the a priori structure of his scheme. But in fact, he reinstated the status of the individual against the pre-enlightenment tradition. And in fact, freedom is a postulate of morality for him. So it is something absolutely necessary for any human action and human moral action, that also. And also the concept of progress. So it will be difficult to see that Kant denied the possibility of progress, because progress for him in terms of our getting more and more rational, educated, and in a sense understanding others. So it is not that the other is not present in Kant. The other is also part of what he calls the self. So in that sense, he is not leading us to any solipsistic framework. And second point is, if we take Rorty seriously, then the question of ethnocentricity, the community-based freedom, for example, and intersubjectivity could degenerate into denial of individual freedom. If I am part of a communal system, a community, the community may prevail over my own choice and my freedom. So ethnocentricity may not be an absolute. The word absolute will be objectionable. It should not be a rational alternative to the Kant's idea of a moral community. The Kant had the notion of a moral community, rational community. And Rorty's ethnocentric community, which will be equivalent to a tribal community perhaps, though he meant that Europeans will constitute, the educated Europeans will constitute his community. But that is not a human community. So Kantian community is more human rather than Rorty's ethnocentric community. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. See, my comments basically, I am agree with the assertion by you, sir. But my question is, sir, leave aside Godse and Mahatma Gandhi, just stuck to the Ambedkar's philosophy. At the last phase of his life, he have to propagate new religion, new Jainism. So the question always arises that we know that there is no such kind of absolute truth, but why social, political, and intellectual class of the world, particularly India, has not able to propagate or uh, create an institution like a religion which can regulate and which can propagate new sense of understanding and intellect resonating to the attributes of religion. So my question is this.
Thank you, Rahul, for this, passionate presentation. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One about pragmatism and the pragmatic stance that both Rorty and Putnam takes. Pragmatism and the question of workability.
Now, workability itself can degenerate into what works for me. Okay. So how do you, actually get out of this idea, this possibility of degeneration of a pragmatic stance to an purely individual, workable uh, stance which doesn't work? And how does that actually help us in at all enlarging the idea of enlargement that you talked about at the very end of your paper? You know, how do these two strands in their thought, say Rorty's thought, how do they gel together? I'm not very sure. It's because I don't know Rorty that well. Can you please explain?
Thanks, Rahul. I think you should have spoken on the very first day. It's very provocative. Uh, I'm not going to ask any question as such, but I was just wondering, what would Rorty, suppose you are the spokesperson for Rorty scholarship, what would Rorty think about phenomenon like Hitler or Genghis Khan?
Thank you very much, Rahul. I just wanted to take a few, uh, just draw your attention to a few things and ask you that, uh, as you said that since you were writing this paper and wanting to have some clarification, one was that as you began and you spoke about Kant as an absolutist, and then you wanted to have him change his stand. I was wondering that, the application of categories and the category that he's talking about are a certain kind of understanding of the logical subject, as it were. Now, what kind of historicity and flexibility are you asking? Because if you would remember clearly, then he's talking about in the language of faculty psychology. So space and time are forms of sensibility where you receive things passively, and their active understanding has then the 12 categories of understanding. Now, in those categories, what kind of social, historical flexibility are you demanding? So, quantity would mean unity and plurality, quality would mean reality and negation, and so on and so forth. What are you demanding of Kant? He is not talking about any specific virtue like the for subsequent things that you are talking about, that on whether sati is all right or not. It is about the forms of knowing. Now, in those forms of knowing, what kind of demand are you making of a person like Kant? And therefore, I think that there needs to be an understanding that freedom and non-freedom, this kind of a discussion, absolutism and non-absolutism, within the realm of the ethics, ethical discourse, and the realm of epistemic and metaphysical discourse, need to be a little more carefully fleshed out. Secondly, I would like you to see that, look, if, you have a very standard kind of an objection often made against Kant, that Kant does not give you a good enough account of how to lead your life because the categorical imperative is too general. But tell me, are you not making a double kind of a demand of the same person? On the one hand, you want freedom, and on the other hand, you want a clear-cut guidance for every particular action. If you get a clear-cut guidance for every particular action, that how would I raise this, and how would I pray to the Lord, and how many things would I have in my rosary, if all specific things are given, it will become like religion, and it will become absolutist. Categorical imperative is so general that it gives you fair amount of flexibility of what and what not to be accommodated with the other things that he's talking about: tact, taste, and intuition. The other question is that when you were saying that in case of Rorty, he said that, closer to reality is not something that we are looking for. Happier and more fulfilled is what we are saying. Now, people may keep on wondering this, asking that what makes you happier? and makes you more fulfilled will also have some kind of a reference to your what you consider to be your own nature. So through the back door, you have again brought back the category that you were so strongly trying to eschew. The other thing which I think I didn't want to say that to Professor Akil Vilgrami, but the other thing which you are saying and you said that is when you are driven by an emotion to help your own child, there is no question, and the desirable is what is the desired is the desirable. Now we all know that this was long back rejected as a naturalistic fallacy by Moore. So what would be your answer to that within a philosophical gathering, and how would you just then go back without giving a good answer to that? And as I think the last question came here again, that the community objectivity that you are talking about, Rorty and nobody will actually ever say that this community objectivity will be a statistical notion. Because if it will be a statistical notion, it would be a majoritarian thing. So the kind of thing this is, I don't know, all members of certain community should go away. If it is not to be majoritarian, then you will have to go back to what Rawls would call reflective equilibrium, or what they will call rational consensus. And so through the back door, you are getting back to the same thing, that the ideas of rationality and the ideas of reflective equilibrium will have to be more and over and above the individual subjects. And therefore, there is perhaps no escape from what you are trying to eschew, and that is the kind of abstraction, and where I feel that you are calling all abstraction absolutist.
Well, I was expecting all of this, so no surprise to me. But let me see if I can remember all the questions correctly. I'll try to answer them honestly. The first question, I think Anupam asked about the absolute truth, like caste, inequality, reservation issues. What are the reasons behind it? I mean, I would say these kinds of things got perpetuated and took a long time to get any kinds of correction into it, because they were all backed by the similar absolutist framework. And that's why first the resistance was almost impossible, and later if there was resistance, the acceptance was quite slow. So I think this is that is how these so-called inequalities, I won't say in terms of absolute bad, but I would say that is how we are all animals, and we are trying to make sense of ourselves. This is a kind of hit and trial, right? The entire human history or human civilization is nothing but attempt to understand ourselves, to give meaning to our life. There is no deeper human nature. So this idea is completely faulty, that know thyself and all the problems will be solved. I know human beings are rational, and yet we fail to live up to the what rational standards so-called demand. So this is, I don't think, is working out. So this is what I would like to answer to you. And then Professor Balram Singh has asked this question, that this rational or ratiocination is something like mathematical, and then this rationality should be seen as mathematical. And I can only think of, at a moment, this Humean answer. Since I'm teaching this treatise of human nature, and Hume is skeptical of sense and reason both, and he has given this very fascinating answer. He's saying that 2 plus 2 is equal to seem to us very intuitively true, right? Because the numbers are very small. But if you put a lot numbers and then you calculate them, you can never be sure that the result that you will get will be equal what the numbers you have on the left side. And each next attempt that you make in order to be sure for the earlier result that you found out will lead it to the infinite probability and will get rid of any certainty that you had at the first place. So I mean, he has given the example of a any accountant, right, who's maintaining a huge ledger for every day, and at the end of the day he calculates. And in order to rule out the mistake, that whether he has made any mistake or not in the calculation, he goes on making another calculation. And then in order to rule out the mistakes in the second calculation, he goes for the third one. And then you can go on infinite, and this will reduce all the sense of objectivity in the mathematical reasoning that you're talking about. So I think this is what I can think of. So there is no guarantee in mathematical, if you're equating rationality to mathematics. Next is, I think Dr. Rajan has asked this question, that truth is fable, and this freedom is also foundational, you said? Oh, no, I remember. You're saying that I have, from a pragmatist perspective, I have invoked the freedom, and freedom to you appears as a foundational. I would say for Richard Rorty, these kinds of objections are there. That no, on the one hand, you are rejecting all kinds of minimalist foundational entity, and then this freedom is becoming very essential to you. I think he's saying everything comes from our historical experiences. Nothing. I mean, I have given one paper here in this seminar hall on from Rortyian, from Kantian enlightenment to Rortyian rights, and I have defended Richard Rorty. He says that for now we all accept human rights and we love human rights, right? Because it is more fulfilling for us now. But it does not mean that the human rights come from certain deeper fundamental human nature, right? It comes from our historical experiences, that we have learned that this is not how we should live our life. Rather, accepting the human rights will make us slightly better, right? So no foundationality is attached to it, even if you are trying to see this in that way. Then to Professor Pradhan, I think two things. This freedom you're saying is already assumed in Kantian framework as a necessary component to make the morality possible. I read here Kant completely contradictory in his own conception when he is accepting the idea of God and the freedom of will. I see both cannot go hand in hand. If there is a God with all these three attributes, that God is all powerful, omniscient, and omnipresent, right, then human beings remain merely puppet in the hands of God. There's no sense of freedom. So I don't know. I mean, though he has his own region, I know, but that entire metaphysical picture can be also critiqued. So I don't think that goes well. And then the next question is saying that this ethnocentricity may degenerate into this non-individual freedom. Right? I think he is rather saying that this ethnocentricity is rather for enlarging the human freedom. You see, the individuals. I mean, this is where, and that will also answer to your question, sir. He says this. I interpret this very fascinating line that take care of freedom and truth will take care of itself. And that is where it is normativity or normative suggestion from Richard Rorty, that those who are politically, socially powerful, maybe in terms of intellectually very well off, they have to restrain themselves in exercising their freedoms, so that those who are at the receiving end, their freedom is not curtailed. And when you can restrain yourself and allow others to participate at the same level, I think the tentative and the workable truths will emerge. And those truths will also not be final. Maybe they can also be subjected to challenge in the coming time. But in order to create a scope for the emergence of workable truths, you have to restrain your freedom. So the others are also taken care of, and you can ensure a sort of conversation, discussion at the same level. So one is not at the receiving end and one is not at the dictating end. So this is what I would like to suggest, and that can save from the degeneration. Next, this Diwakar has asked this question, Gandhi, Ambedkar, and what is your intellectual? I think you were saying that even Ambedkar has also accepted religion, right?
Presently, the intellect has failed kind of religion.
Okay, I think, yeah, I got the point. But I think we should not think in that way, creating any kind of human project which alludes to the religious framework, right? I think we should have more tentative projects, right? So that everyone's freedom and rationality is allowed to flourish, right? Rather than I'm the one authority, I have put up the human project on you, like all the religions have done, and then you have no scope to exercise your own reason. You are merely followers, right? And then you might be right also, it might be wrong also in following certain system, right? And then this, I think, Professor Mandeepa Sen has also asked the same question, that pragmatism of Rorty or this workable truth may become very individualistic. I think it won't. Why? Because he is invoking this idea of ethnocentricity and freedom, that you have to take care of your freedom. Don't exercise your wider scope of freedom if you're well connected and at the upper age, right? If that is how it is, then you may always ruin others' freedom, right? So this, you can say, a rider Rorty has attached to this, so that he can be saved from being this degenerative or restricting individuals' freedom. And then I think Dr. Bhaskar has asked this question of Hitler. I think it is other way around. Rorty is rather safeguarding us from becoming Hitler, right? The absolutist thinking will make you Hitler, right? Not this humanistic and fallible thinking will make, because you are always having the sense of humility that in your own formulation of human projects, you might be wrong. Or maybe the newer situations may put you under correction, right? So there is no sense of becoming Hitler under pragmatist framework of thinking, but there are very much scopes, right, available in absolutist framework, right? And then Professor Chandra has asked many questions. Categories and freedom and non-freedom. Two things I want to say about Kantian concepts. You also accept they are too general, so they are not harming much. To, and there is a scope for individual tact, taste, and preferences. But I would say, if they are too general, why don't we have it at the first place? And if they are not and become substantive later on, because you see, once you have accepted that foundationality in terms of a priori concepts, right, they may lead to the absolutist end results, right? They may not be very, I mean, they may not be very harmful in terms of being too general, but once the thinking proceeds from that a priori enterprise, right, then the philosophers may become self-acclaimed authority, right, to give the human projects for everyone else. So I think in that way, uh, this can be problematic also. And then this I think I have already answered, that when he is accepting certain kinds of moral progress, right, he is not assuming there is a deeper human nature. Rather, he is against it. He is merely saying, you see, the individuals, I'm saying that individuals will not be turning into solipsistic. Why? Because that scope you do not have. We all realize from human experiences that if I would like to live our life uh, discoordinated from others, right, it will lead immediate thwarting our human projects. So we can maximize our aspirations and our desires by living a more coordinated life rather than being completely individualistic. I mean, if I fight with you, I may lose my life immediately. And if I live a coordinated life, I may maximize many more goals and purposes. I think that sense of understanding from human experience, and that's why the social contract comes. That's why we are living democratic life, giving everyone's sense of uh, security and peace. And within that, we democratically negotiating. Sometimes certain policies may not be good for us, but we still remain true to the democratic spirit, that we can, you see, the persuasion is only left to you. You cannot say if some people have come to the power, no, they have come on the faulty ground. So what will you do? You have to convince others. You cannot go on eliminating those people who have voted certain party, right? You have to also, you got to convince them, right? You need to persuade them. So this is what I would like to say. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Saurabh Toradia for his paper. Dr. Toradia is an assistant professor in the Human and Social Science Research Center at IIT Hyderabad. His areas of specialization are phenomenology, Martin Heidegger, and continental philosophy. He completed his PhD degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University and a postdoctoral degree from NIAS Bangalore. He has published in various international journals like Human Studies, Journal of Dharma Studies, EPW, JICPR, and many others. May I invite Dr. Saurabh Todaria to present his paper.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible? So, yeah. Am I audible, Professor Chandra?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. I can't hear you, so that's why.
I can see you.
Yeah. So thanks, so respected Professor Chandra, Honorable Chair. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and I also thank Dr. Rahul for the introduction, for the invitation. So the previous paper, in a way, helped me because it gives a well-argued and the philosophical, historical view of Immanuel Kant philosophy. So my paper is also analyzing Kant from the historical perspective, but my approach is more textual. I will analyze especially the metaphysics of morals and some other works of the Kant in the context of the question of animality, question of animals. And I will also try to see that interface with the Jain philosophy. And the framework of my argument would be based on Kant's notion, the interesting notion which Kant present in his metaphysics of moral, which is called as the indirect duty. Yeah.
Saurabh, we can't see you. Can you have you switched off your video? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So am I audible properly, sir? Am I audible? I can't hear you, Professor Chandra. Okay. Okay. So here I go. Kant metaphysics. So I start the paper. So Kant's metaphysics of morals is basically divided into two sections: the doctrine of right and the doctrine of virtue. The doctrine of right deals with the rights we have, while the later deals with the ethical virtues which we ought to possess. Before delving into this book and the question and the status of the animals based on it, it is important for us to understand the foundation for his moral philosophy, which we have discussed a lot in the previous paper and in the consequent discussion. So, Kantian ethics basically centered around the ideas of duty and moral law. He builds his framework of morality around the two basic concepts. First is the categorical imperative, according to which human beings can act only according to those maxims which they would want to be extended as a universal law as well. Secondly, he believes that human beings are end in themselves, since he emphasizes on the importance of autonomy and rationality. This is because, according to him, rational beings possess intrinsic value, and so they are the citizens of the kingdom of ants, unlike non-human animals, which are like the non-human animals. So, so which I would try to show, Kant actually builds a kind of a very strong and logically convincing framework for the morality. As we know, Kant's moral philosophy is deeply rooted in the concept of rationality, which is the resource of morality and moral application. According to him, humanity is the ability to set the end for oneself, and this capacity of self governance on the basis of reason is what gives the ability as well the reason for our action and ensure that they align with the respect for rationality. So, rationality for Kant is basically the reasons because we are the self governing being, and if we want to act on certain or if we want to act, so we ought to give the reason for that, and that should be the universal in the framework. He draws a distinction between the three aspects of human nature according to him, which are humanity, animality, and personality. The distinction he makes in metaphysics of moral. In Against words, animality include a physical or mechanical self-love for self-preservation, the propagation of the species in sex and parenting drives, and for community with other human beings of the social drive. So Kant, so I'm quoting Kant. He says in the Metaphysics of Morals, man has a duty to raise himself from the crude state of his nature, from his animality, quod actum, more and more towards humanity, by which he alone is capable of setting himself ends. And he has a duty to diminish his ignorance by instruction and to correct his errors. As we can see in this case too, Kant often mentions how we should overcome our animal nature and that it is our duty as a human being arise past the crude state of nature from animality towards humanity. The way Kant has referred to animals, which has been discussed in much more details later in this paper, animality makes it very clear that from his point of view, our shared animality is morally insignificant. So what uh, I'm trying to show that how the question of morality, question of the ethics has in metaphysics or moral is drawn in contrast to the animals, which is basically crude in the nature, driven by the desires. So Kant established in the text that animal has the capacity of desire and life. He refers to the capacity for desire as a being's capacity to be by means of its representation, like quoting the Kant, cause of the object of those representation, that is to act for the sake of some effect foreseen and desired. Unquote. This is where he draws the distinction between human beings and other animals for the first time. In case of animal, he uses the term brute choice, while he reserves a higher level for as a whole for human. To put in the simple terms, he says, suppose if there is an object of my desire is kept in front of me. If I was a non-human animal, I'm most likely to simply go for it. However, since I'm a human being, I'm a rational being capable of not just desiring and feeling things, but also reflecting on my thoughts, feelings, and desire. And so, I will firstly contemplate and analyze my choice before I act accordingly to it. So he says, I'm quoting him, human choice, however, is a capacity for choice that can indeed be affected but not determined by impulses. So this is very interesting that it can be affected, but it is not determined by impulses, and is therefore of itself is not pure, but can be determined by the actions by pure will. So because the desire is something, because when humans is gonna act, at that time he can be affected by the impulses and the desires, the animal will most likely to go, in all probability, he will go for that. But the humans have the capacity to self-reflect. And this self-reflection makes the human a rational creature when he can, as if double himself. On the one hand, he can see his streams of the consciousness, which is desiring, and on the end, he can also have a perspective on it. As Kant mentioned, what distinguishes human agents from other animals is their capacity for free choice. However, he says that it is a necessary condition for moral agency, but not the sufficient. What makes human beings moral agents, unlike other animals, is not that an object of desire induces pleasure in the person, but the fact that human beings have the capacity to make it to his end, to satisfy the desire, and that they do so with the conscious will by following a maxim that they have adopted for themselves. Non-human animals lie completely outside the scope of moral application for Kant. According to him, fundamental work goes hand in hand with free will and moral agency. So there is no direct reason in Kantian ethics for human beings to be morally obligated to non-human animals. Right? There are several excerpts from the book where this stance becomes pretty clear. So, for instance, he says, I'm quoting, now just as we say that since vegetables, example potatoes and domestic animals are as regard their abundance a product of man, which he can use, wear out, its kill, uh, it seems we can also say that since most of his subjects are his own product, the supreme authority in a state, the sovereign, has the right to lead them into war as he would take them on a hunt and into battles as on a pleasure trip. Although such an argument for this right, which may well be present obscurely in the monarch's mind, holds with regard to animals, which can be a man's property, it simply cannot be applied to man, especially as a citizen of a state. Unquote. So this satisfies perfectly to present Kant's view that human beings, being the moral agent that they are end in themselves, whereas non-human animals are means to the end. So what we are going to argue is that basically in the Kant's philosophical framework, ethical moral framework, so there is a kind of a logical conclusion that how that why we should treat the other human beings as a moral agent or as an end in themselves. But by the same logic, the animals are excluded. Because if we also include the animals, the framework cannot be sustained. So according to him, rational beings possesses intrinsic value and must be treated as end in themselves rather than merely as a means to an end. This thus leaves us with an overwhelming question, which is in that case, can we just treat animals in a way we want to, torturing them or killing them? Now, Kant, as a great philosopher he is, provides a solution, and that's I think like the like greatness or it that he doesn't say that we can kill the animals. Animals are just a mean. So he comes up with an interesting concept of the indirect duty towards the animals. According to Kant, the duty of human beings only lies to themselves and fellow human beings, since his duty to any subject is curtailed by the subject's will. Because other human beings are also the end in themselves, they are also autonomous beings by virtue of the rationality they share with the other human being. So the subject automatically so the moral subjects naturally and automatically would be the another human being, because we establish in the Kantian context that non-human animals lack will, lack self-reflection, and our subject here needs to be someone capable of moral obligation. Therefore, even when we feel that we have a duty to any other non-human being, so it is because, as he writes in a particular section, amphibly in his concept of reflection, what seems to us as our duty that non-human subject is actually a duty to ourselves, but we are somehow misunderstanding by mistaking our duty with regard to other human beings for our duty to those human beings. The non-human entities could only be inanimate objects, plants and animals, but also the supreme beings like angels and gods that bring us to the Kant's stance on the treatment of animals. If we torture a dog, we would not be violating our duty to the dog, but rather our duty to ourselves as rational being and moral agents. So Kant says in Metaphysics of Moral, with regard to the animate but non-rational part of creation, violent and cruel treatment of animals is far more intimately opposed to man's duty to himself. And he has a duty to refrain from this, for it dulls his shared feeling of their pain and so weakens and gradually uproots a natural predisposition that is very serviceable to morality and one's relationship with other men. So this is a very interesting that when Kant says that when we are torturing a dog, so we are not harming, we are not violating or a dog, but rather we are violating the duty we have towards ourselves as a rational being or as a moral agent. So essentially what he is trying to say is that we should not cause unnecessary suffering to animals because we share with animal the common feeling of pain, and so we can empathize with them in that respect. So being cruel to animal will make us less sensitive to other suffering, other fellow beings suffering, mind you. So these fellow beings constitute the humans, and we will become uncompassionate not just to the non-human animals, but to the other human beings, fellow human beings as well. Excuse me. Kant justifies killing of animals for consumption, for putting them to work, as long as their pain and suffering can be minimized. So Kant will be okay with the, animal work as long as we minimize their pain and suffering. In case of domesticated animals, he says that we should not overwork or strain them. He even goes on to say that gratitude to the service of animal is also a duty to oneself and not to the animal. So the philosophical problem is not in Kant's philosophy about the treatment of the animals. So Kant's framework will very will go with the fair treatment of the animals. We should not be cruel towards them. We should not harm them. We should not inflict the unnecessary pain on them. But at the same time, the philosophical question arises while when one is doing that. So does he harming the animal or he is harming oneself? So there the Kant philosophy in a kind of falters where he would say, like when we are doing that, we are not harming the animal per se, we are not wronging the animal, but we are wronging ourselves. So at this point, there are multiple questions which in unanswered, and there are many aspects of Kant framework which can be criticized by other philosophers, especially who are working in this um, interface of Kant and the animal ethics. One prominent philosopher, as O'Hagan, he mentions that multiple philosophers have argued that Kantian ethics should be abandoned on the ground that it is a radically opposed to the common sense view that animal suffering matters, and so animal deserve direct moral concern. And while other people and Kosagard also, she also argues that on the other hand, she argues that no, in Kant there is a seeds, there is a sufficient framework which can, which can work for the animals' rights. So overall, the problem is that that there is a criticism that the Kant's view, especially by the animal ethics philosopher like Peter Singer, that Kant's view is anthropocentric, human-centered, and does not consider the interest of animals, which I think is not completely justified. Kant's framework account for the animals' welfare, but there is some philosophical ambivalence in that. So, according to Peter Singer, he argues that sentience and the capacity to suffer should be the primary basic formal consideration and not rationality, because every animal, even from every animal has the interest in the saving the life. So this should become the basic framework. So he uses this argument to say that the fundamental principle of equality should be extended to non-humans as well, because they also share the they also share the interest in saving their life. And Singer calls criticizes Kant's framework or the philosophical frameworks in general as the speciesism, prioritizing human beings over other animals based only on their species membership, and compares it with serious prevalent issues like racism and sexism, which involve human beings and particular human beings and exclude the other at a different historical point of time. So still, I feel that there is a Peter Singer is overlooking a critical factor, because what Kant is arguing, not that what the Kant is arguing, that in his framework, animal cannot be treated rationality, because animal does not share the rationality. It is not capable of taking decision on his own. So there becomes an open question: how do we treat the animals in the Kantian framework? So he basically comes up with the concept of the indirect duties. Yeah. So in her book Fellow Creature, Christian Kosegard contends that Kant's ethical framework, which largely focus on any rational being like human being, basically, can be extended to the some extent with major revisions to include animals, non-humans as well. Animals have intrinsic value according to Kosegard because they are sentient entities capable of experiencing pleasure and sorrow. According to her, there is no fundamental difference between humans and other animals other than their different forms of cognition. If there is any such pivotal difference between humans and other animals, then it is the fact that some animals may be important to themselves because their own conscious choice is a great good for them. There is no neutral way to judge and create this hierarchy within animals. And so, according to her, the claim of comparative importance is basically senseless. The idea of absolute importance now comes into the picture. So the question arises that humans are no other animals uh, than the creatures of absolute importance. Firstly, how do we define? We define as humans as the absolute importance. Human beings could be put on the pedestal of absolute importance if the good for humans was necessary for the good of all living creatures and would be the part of the some good of every other individual. Essentially, the lack of meaning is something that is considered important but is not connected to anything substantial, is being replaced by the idea the importance is now given to the meaningful things or concepts. So, what is the Kierkegaard is trying to suggest is that defining human beings as absolutely important is definitely very convenient, and it makes it much more easier for us to understand the concept, but it's a rather shaky and unrealistic argument with not much logical or empirical backing. She disagrees with the fact that our duties to animals is indirect and claims that harming animals is a moral violation not just because of our character but because of the nature of non-human animals themselves. So this is what Krishna Koskard, who herself is a Kantian, and she takes this question very interestingly in her book Fellow Creatures, with the question of the Kant and the non-human animals. And what we say is that uh, the question of the animal is something which is not only limited to the Kant's metaphysics of morals only, but also come back in the some of his important work, especially the anthropology from the pragmatic point of view, and in the third critique of judgment as well. So in the next section, what I'm going to do, take up some interesting part from the third critique and the anthropology, that how Kant's question of the animal is somehow tied to the notion of the enlightenment. And yeah, so the question of animal is something which vexes Kant throughout his philosophical engagement with determining the nature of the man, as we can see in his critique of judgment and anthropology. So we cannot forget that was in the Enlightenment, uh, where it is considered something which the humans are coming of an age, and humans become the self-conscious man. They had got the ability to determine themselves through and how they can determine themselves through the autonomous capacity of the reason. So, as in the Kant, reason is something which is always in conflict with the feelings, and that is why it is important to demarcate animals from the humans from the animal. In his letter to Reinhold on 28 December 1787, Kant says that his discovery of a priori principle for the capacity of pleasure and displeasure led him to embark on a new project of writing a third critique. Both the first and the second introduction identify this principle with a subjective or aesthetic representation of the principle governing the reflective power of judgment, namely the purposive nature of the nature in our faculty of cognition. What does it mean to say that pleasure and displeasure can be appropriate or inappropriate. In the third critique, Kant talks about how the Kant basically argues the question that how the beauty can be determined a priori. So beauty cannot be the result of the social tastes, or the it is something which is a priori in the nature. So especially in the aesthetic judgment will involve the unity of all mind. That is the basic framework of the third critique. So Kant maintains that the feeling is a capacity governed not only by the principle, but by an a priori principle that enables judgment of beauty to lay claim to the universal and necessary validity. Unlike the non-rational animals, humans are capable of feeling a kind of pleasure that involves a claim to be as it should be, not just for me, but for any rational subject. The a priori principle of the capacity for feelings that distinguishes human beings from feelings in non-human animals. Their faculty of feeling is not governed by an a priori feeling. The question about the possibility of an a priori feeling can be found in in the humans only. So, in other words, the beauty can only be experienced by the humans only. So that is by the not by the animals. So animals will desire the nature, while the humans can see the beauty in the nature and can terminate the means to end relationship with the nature and can realize the ultimate purpose in the nature, what he calls the purposive nature without purpose. Because when you experience the beauty, you can actually realize that nature beauty doesn't have any purpose. It is a purposive nature without purpose, and that is why one can find one's own, like a destiny or a telos why the human being are. So this can also be seen the discussion of the human beings in nature in the end of the third critique and in the anthropology's lecture also. Like any other living being, the humans beings strive for their own fulfillment or happiness, which can be understood as agreement with its species concept or life form. But nothing in our nature determine us what our happiness will be. So what like Rahul was also criticizing that okay, the Kant's categorical imperative does not give, like a solid framework. But that is what Kant actually argue that nothing in our nature determines what our happiness will be. Concept of the happiness is not one that human beings has say abstracted from his instinct and thus derived from the animality in himself. Instead, man outlines the idea of happiness for himself. And in so many ways that we can assume no determinate, universal and fixed law by means of which we correspond this unstable concept and thus with the idea which the human being sets for himself. So all I want to say is that what distinguishes human beings from other animals is that we can assign what he writes. So he writes, I quote him, assign his class in the system of animate nature. That we can set the end for ourselves, and that is what distinguishes of human beings is that they lack a determinate given natural end and must constitute a life form for themselves through the use of reason. Indeed, this indeterminacy in our nature can be taken as the sign of the capacity of reason within us. While the animals, they will follow the natural land, they will be guided by the nature. So humans, according to Kant, lacks a determinate given natural end, and they, through the exercise of the reason, they can make a goal for themselves. So this open-ended character of human nature does not mean that self-constitution can occur in the completely arbitrary manner. So practical reason supplies us with the idea of our highest good, which can be highest good, which is like we have to consider ourselves as the kingdom of the ants. So this final end, but this final end is outside of the nature. It is not something which is given by the nature in our animal instincts, and so there is no determinate preform mode of the life being in the human animal, and as Kant suggests in anthropology, it is up to make the transition for the human to make the transition from the nature to freedom, from animality to morality, and thereby engage in an eternal process of defining ourselves. So the human being is thus destined by his reason to cultivate, civilize, and finally moralize himself, or to effect a transition from nature to freedom, which he progressively strives to give himself a form of life. That is what he argues in anthropology. Anthropology from pragmatic point of animal. So so to basically to put all this in a nutshell, the question of the animal in Kant, therefore, is very much concerned with the Enlightenment ideals. So we have to see it in the historical context where the Kant needs to define himself as a self-legislative being And self-legislation is possible through the exercise of the reason, which distinguishes it from the animals as they are motivated by the desires and cannot be the member of the kingdom of ants, and humans have to rise himself from the nature to the freedom. As Kant tries to build his systematic case for the humans as the self-legislative being capable of comprehending the goal for themselves through the exercise of reason, both in its capacity as a pure and practical reason, the moral status of animals remains an poetic situation in Kant's philosophy. On the one hand, they are excluded from the moral realm as they are not at par with the humans. On the other hand, the cruelty towards them can completely corrupt the moral sensibility of humans. Kant tries to resolve the dilemma through the notion of indirectity towards the animals, which gave rise to the problems which we have discussed so far. Now, at this juncture, I would like to explore the what how the this relationship between the animal humans and the non-humans are thought philosophically in other traditions, and one of important tradition is Jainism. So in this paper, which I would try to venture into this to see that how this relationship between the humans and non-human is thought, and whether it can resolve the dilemma which is created in the context of the Kant's philosophy. So now we will try to see how the humans and non-humans relationships have been thought of in the other philosophical traditions, which have altogether different historicity and worldview. Jainism is interesting in this case as they have an extremely rigorous attitude and the code of conduct towards the non-human animals. Jainism approaches the question of humans and animals from their capacity to experience the world through their senses. Jainism in almost phenomenological manner emphasize on the embodied capacity to experience the world. The living beings are classified on the basis of number of senses they possess. For instance, one sense, one sense souls, such as those of the plants, which have only the sense of the touch, according to Jain thought. On the opposite end of this spectrum lies the animals, which include both humans and non-humans, are the five sense beings. Other beings, including worms, two cents, ants, three cents, flies, four cents, occupy the middle level in the Jain's ontological system. So these jivas can attain liberation only while occupying a human form. So there in a certain degree of, but still there remains a certain degree of parity among humans and the animals that is absent from, say, many other philosophical religious traditions. Human and non-human share commonalities in their possession of all five senses. They are both panchendriya, a kind of the organism. The shared situation of humans and non-humans animals also lead to the greater empathy for animals because their suffering is tantamount to our own suffering. Because both humans and non-humans animals share the five senses, so so one can actually empathize that they can also suffer like us. The shared cognition and the finitude become the source of moral disposition in Jainism. In Kant, the source of moral motivation, which is the respect for the moral law. So this is a very important concept that in Kant, the source of the moral motivation, that why should the pure reason, from the pure reason, I can move to the practical reason, right? Where I realize that there is the respect for the moral law, and it prompts me to practically act, to act in accordance with the practical reason. So the respect for moral law, as I see myself and other as an end in themselves, brings me out from my particularities and adopt the take the universal point of view, where I see everyone as the every other human being as the end in themselves. However, the notion of indirect duty towards animals falters on the account of the moral motivation. What will motivate a moral agent to treat an animal morally in Kant's framework? They cannot be the member of the kingdom of ants, as they cannot invoke the they cannot invoke the categorical imperative. So they don't have the reasons. So I can only be morally motivated towards the non-human animals when I see that, okay, if I'm harming the non-human animals, so I'm harming myself. So, but on the other hand, in Jainism,
Uh,
the
can
moral,
can you wind up your paper in
yeah,
another?
sure. On the other hand, the Jainism, the moral motivation comes from the realization of the shared finitude in terms of the sentient experience of Panchendriya. So, sir, I have I require 2 to 3 minutes. Is that okay, or I should certain wind up soon. Okay. So Jainism basically postulates that each being occupies a fixed place in a cosmological hierarchy based on the degree of sensory perception and self-awareness. Worldly beings inhabit space and time, come to perceive their existence in samsara through the senses. So, okay, so I just uh, okay, so the shared condition of jivas idly give rise to the times of the sensory community, which is commonly expressed in the principle of interdependence. All life is bound together by mutual support and interdependence. Jainism achieves its ethical concern and compassion for the non-humans not through a desire for communion with other human beings, but through a sense of shared plight and a shared existential situation that leads to the empathy and the moral commitment to the non-harm. Ahimsa principle of ahimsa and the forgiveness. And it is important to note that the tragedy of the animal birth is not absolute in Jainism. All souls trapped in the cycle of birth and death, samsara, move continuously through different embodied life forms, each incarnation to the other. Human being is but one such incarnation. So, so there is a distinction between the humans and non-humans is not absolute. The crossover in the forms of the transmigration and cycle of the birth in the samsara. So human beings realizes the animals as the fellow sufferers. And the rigorous emphasis on the non-harm toward the animals is not merely a code of conduct. Rather, it is a phenomenological experience of realizing finitude in the face of the existential suffering. As animals are co-sufferers in the cycle of samsara, hence Jainism emphasizes on cultivating the feeling of compassion, maitri, and care toward the animal. So I conclude, so this is my final conclusion. Kant's notion of indirect duty puts Kant's moral philosophy in a tough spot as far as the animal ethics is concerned. While it makes a substantial case for the moral behavior based on reason, human acts within the space of reason and they cannot justify immoral and unfair behavior with others while expecting the justice and fairness for themselves. That is why Kant insist on the universality of the moral law. However, Kant faced the difficulty when his philosophy was exposed to the question of animality. He cannot accord them the moral status, but at the same time, treating them cruelly may divest human of their own moral disposition and can generate them into a morally insensitive person. It seems that the moral motivation, which is invoked through the respect for the moral laws, gets subdued in the face of the non-human and can only be restored when the moral agent somehow remembers that animals per se don't deserve the moral respect, but the kindness can help in maintaining and restoring one's moral nature. Jainism, on the other hand, takes a phenomenological approach toward the question of animals, where the unity between the humans and non-humans are established on the basis of the shared five senses, the realization of shared embodied finitude, and the intertwined fate in the suffering and samsara become the source of moral motivation in the form of friendship and compassion toward the animal in Jainism. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Much. Thank you very much, Saurabh, for an excellent paper on Kant and the question of animals, uh, along with a very detailed and uh, comprehensive kind of an understanding of the Jain perspective and relating the two issues, throwing certain questions. Since we are very pressed of time, what I'm going to do is that I'll immediately request the other paper reader to present her paper, and then perhaps we could take the questions together after that, right? So may I now request Dr. Shilpi Srivastava. Is she there? Is Shilpi there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. It's a pleasure that you are here. Dr. Shilpi Srivastava Dr. is presenting her paper on exploring the truths behind the concept of truth. She is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy, Deshbandhu College, University of Delhi. After completing her master's from the University of Lucknow, she did her MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has taught in several prestigious colleges of University of Delhi for the past 14 years, and she has presented papers in several national and international conferences and seminars. She also has many publications to her credit, and her areas of interest include ethics, logic, feminism, bioethics, and film appreciation. So, Shilpi.
A very good morning to everyone present. I hope I'm audible. So, yeah. At the outset, I must thank Rahul, a very dear friend and a former colleague, for offering me this opportunity. I was actually supposed to be there in Banaras and interacting with everyone, but as the situation would have it, I'm connecting only on the virtual mode. And what all I have to say today is, I would say, it would not be apt to call it an exact paper, but since in the audience I have my teachers both from Lucknow University as well as from JNU, so I think as a student I can just share my thoughts and a feedback which can help me, put my thoughts in a better and a structured manner. So I'll try to be very brief. A little time. Some issues which might be left while I may be taken up in the discussion which might follow. And I'm really looking forward to the comments and points that come. The mankind's most serious occupation for the longest time. And it has been largely believed that the fundamental aim of all our efforts toward understanding the world, our own self or the other, whether it is scientific or spiritual, has been about discovering certain truths about them. So when we ask what a scientist is doing or what a spiritual guru is doing, I think we'll answer in that both of them are really engaged with finding the truths about our existence, about the world, and so on and so forth. A knowledge claim was considered valid only if its contents were true. So across the different domains of philosophy, we find an inherent occupation with the notion of truth. In logic, we determine the validity of arguments, sometimes on the basis of certain truth relations between premises and conclusions. Metaphysical discourses are primarily about finding the true nature of reality. In epistemology, there's largely been the dominance of the JTB thesis, where truth is an important component of what claims are acceptable. And if we talk about the ethical discussions, we often talk about there being certain moral truths which we need to uncover. Aristotle has discussed the concept of truth in his metaphysics, while the ethical and spiritual philosophy of Buddha has its beginning. All of this is that how important truth had been. Now, in made due deliberations for understanding of truth itself. One of the very basic questions about truth is, what is truth predicated to? Like, what is it that we friends, true identity, but then philosophically speaking, we have this and I'll just very briefly talk about the major ones to just pinpoint. To the actual state of affairs or the facts. Now, this may seem to us as the most common sense related understanding of what truth is. But here, what is important note here is, in the correspondence with truth, we believe that truth is about, it is related to something which is out there. And it's a factual reality that it has to correspond to. Next, we have the coherence theory of truth. The truth of a certain belief here is understood with reference to how well it aligns itself with all other of our beliefs. And unlike the correspondence theory, the relation here is not between truth and reality, but the relation between one truth, the belief of one truth with respect to the other beliefs that we have. Then we have the pragmatic theory of truth. A true belief is one that is useful to believe in. Truth here is not about discovering a fact or fitting in and aligning with a cluster of other beliefs, but rather what provides us with stability and consistency in our lives. It is interesting to note that here the truth of certain beliefs is possible only because we believe in it. Like, for example, if you take the case of a patient who is suffering from some serious ailment, very often it has been proved by medical science also that the person X will be able to overcome their illness only if we actually begin with this belief that I am going to overcome this. So the truth of the belief is to some extent dependent on the person who believes in it. The proponents of each of these theories have strongly argued against the other ones and have often given plausible arguments to show why truth cannot be interpreted. And there is a vast literature in philosophy that covers these. A few issues largely related to each other, but that emerged through these discussions that seem worthy of deliberations are, and I'm asking just three questions primarily about our notions of truth. The first one is truth necessarily associated with falsehood? The second, with respect to a certain issue, is there the truth about the matter, or is there a possibility of truths or the multiple truths possible? And thirdly, and most importantly, does an inquiry about truth serve any significant purpose? That may seem ironical because I'm presenting a paper on truth and asking the question if it actually has a dualism with respect to truth is undeniable. He argues, a theory of truth must be such as to admit of its opposite, and that is falsehood. A good many philosophers have constructed theories according to which all our thinking ought to have been true, and have then had the greatest difficulty in finding a place for falsehood, unquote. So the logical claim is that if P is true, then not P is most obviously false, such that P and not P is self-contradictory. However, the moment one accepts that truth itself is relative to the context and perspective, this idea of strict binary loses its strength. A figure of 6 drawn on sand may be a 9 for a person standing on the opposite side, and both these claims about the same figure can be true at the same time. This brings us to the next related question regarding the possibility of multiple truths. The moment the focus shifts from the idea of an absolute reality to relativity of contexts and situations, the possibility of multiple truths seems comprehensible. The final question about whether the pursuit of truth is an act worth considering is one that Richard Rorty also asked when he writes, "Is truth a goal of inquiry?" According to Rorty, pragmatism often suffers because the moment the proponents reject the idea that correspondence to reality is the criterion for determining truth, they are demanded to provide an alternative criterion for truth, and the failure to provide such a criterion leads them to reject pragmatism. What remains completely unacknowledged here is the shift that is being suggested. Rorty claims that, quote, a culture in which we no longer put the skeptic's question whether we are getting nearer to truth would be better than the one in which we ask the philosophy professors to assure us that we are indeed doing so. For in such a culture, we would be more sensitive to the marvelous diversity of the human languages and of the social practices associated with those languages. Instead of asking, are there truths that we shall never discover, we would ask, are there ways of talking and acting that we have not yet explored? We should ask whether each of the various descriptions of reality employed in our various cultural activities the best mean to the ends served by those activities. The two benefits, and here I end the quotation. So the two benefits that such a shift will entail, according to Rorty, are saving us from giving priority to one kind of activity over the other, and taking us from activity to Kantwad in its metaphysical context and Sadwad, some of these having judgments presenting a relative view can be found in Jain thought. The Jaina believes in three ways of knowing a truth. When a partial truth is judged to be the absolute truth, it is called Durniti. Stating a relative truth without stating if it is absolute or relative is Nai. And stating the partial truth with a realization that it is relative and partial is called Pramana. So a Nai qualified by Syat becomes a Pramana. The theory of Syadva can help us understand some of these key issues about truth that we had discussed earlier. The claim of the correspondence theory of truth regarding truth being necessarily associated with the notion of false can be avoided by this theory of relativity, where the different judgments accept something to be real and unreal from relative standpoints. The coherent theory of truth requires that a belief be coherent with the truth or the absolute truth. It's like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that fit. So when we talk about coherence, it's like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that fit into the complete picture. And if a certain picture does not fit well, it may be discarded. The concept of Syat or relativity, on the other hand, does not refer to the complete picture. It accepts each truth merely as a relative standpoint with the understanding that an opposite relative standpoint is possible too. Here, I think many times, yesterday also, when talking about the Jain philosophy, the reference to this classic example of the blind men and the elephant was popping up. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Dr. Bhaskar has made this remark that, all these relative viewpoints still have, they are relative to each other, but there's still an absolute elephant, the notion of that absolute elephant, which gives validation to these. I would here would like to differ from that, and I would say that when Jain thinkers are claiming, when this example crops up about these 6 blind men, trying to know the elephant, it's not really the reference to the absolute or the reference to the elephant that gives him. It's actually more about, how. So each of these viewpoints, like the one who looks at it as a wall and the one who looks at it as a rope or the one who looks at it as a pillar, each have the relative standpoint, because none of these blind people can actually have a look at the entire elephant. So their knowledge claim is as valid as the other ones, only because from the perspective from where they're looking at it, it is justified. The Jaina theory of Syadvad is often criticized by claiming that the notion of relative is understood only with reference to an absolute, and in the absence of it, relativity makes no sense. This may be understood in light of a similar fascination in the West regarding an absolute reality that corresponds to and validate all our truth. Now, we are actually living in a present time, where the contemporary developments around the globe, the discourse is now moving from the concept of truth to the concept of post-truth. Though it is majorly discussed in the political sphere, however, there are scholars who believe that Nietzsche's view that humans create the truth about this world through their metaphors and myths could be a backdrop on which these reasoned ideas have emerged. And people may argue that not having a reference to an absolute fact or reality may actually take us towards becoming a victim of the post-truth politics. And political leaders or media houses may freely influence the emotions and also narratives that shift, that suit their purposes. However, here I feel that the notion of accepting the plurality of truth has become even more important, because when we accept that truth claims can be relative to different standpoints, and when we accept this claim seriously, this is the only way that we can ensure that the truths of the minorities, the truth of the subaltern, the truth of the marginalized people are accepted too, alongside the grand narrative of the majoritarian viewpoint which is being projected. We need to acknowledge the fact here that we do not validate or falsify the world as such. Whenever, but our claims about the world. So truth is all about the claim that we are making about the world. Truth is not merely out there to be discovered, but rather truth relates to people's practices, their commitments, their inquiries, and their assertions. With respect to these practices and commitments, there is a need to have a scope for relativity, because this in the long run would help and defining our moral, religious, and political commitments in a better light. They will help us in posing the right questions and leading us far from conflicts. That, in my world, valuable that to be discovered. So that's basically what I had to say in the beginning, and I'm hoping that we will have a discussion which will, make my points even more clear.
Thank you very much, Shilpi, for your paper, where many issues have been thrown up. Many senses to the term truth have been brought out, and perhaps we would all benefit greatly if they were clarified in the course of discussion. The two papers are now open for questions. At least for Shilpi, I think, Shilpi, one of the very important questions which I would like you to consider is that in the latter part of your paper, when you suddenly started talking about truth, that the idea of commitments, aspirations, beliefs leading to truth, and the Dalit truth and the feminist truth, etc. There, the discussion of truth and the discussion of truth when we are talking about truth as an operator on statements, which are meant to be descriptive, has to be a little more carefully fleshed out. Because when you are talking about descriptive statements, for instance, that this is a white sheet of paper on which something is scribbled, then this truth is neither a bourgeois truth, nor a Dalit truth, nor a feminist truth. It is supposed to be within the realm of a very formalistic notion of how the operator truth is to be used in terms of what Strawson would call a statement, not even a proposition or a sentence. And then when a certain individual wants to communicate to the other a certain description of the reality, it is then that the operator true and its opposite false is operational. And when you take instances like the artist of the truth of the artist, or the truth of the freedom fighter, or the truth of the mother's love for the child, there I think there would be many other people who would suggest that the more expansive notion of significance would be perhaps more useful. And therefore, the discussions may inform each other, but will not be identical. So it's not that they are so disparate that one would not inform the other, and that I think is to be considered by you. Also, I thought that, the confusion of reality having many faces, or reality being described in multiple ways, will make very little difference to the formal notion of truth in the form of a Tarski convention. And that's the kind of discussion which we thought is generally done within the technical field of academic philosophy. Outside, of course, there are many meanings. And in that sense, Mirati may be right that you can't have a general theory of truth which actually takes care of all those meanings of the term truth. But are there any questions? If there aren't any, I think we can congratulate the three speakers of the session. Rahul, Saurabh and Shilpi, and I take this opportunity to once again thank the organizers, Professor Mehta and Rahul, for giving me an opportunity to listen to these very educative papers. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Now we are going to start next session. And first of all, I request Sir Professor Bimlendra Kumar and Sir Professor Pradyumna Shah uh, to please come on this. And Rakesh sir will present online. So first of all, I would like to present a brief bio note of Professor Bimlendra Kumar. Sir is working as a professor at the Department of Pali and Buddhist Studies, Faculty of Arts, Banaras Hindu University. He has been deputed as ICCR Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Chair of Buddhist Studies at the Lumbini Buddhist University, Lumbini, for 1 year from September 1, 2023. He has 6 years of research experience during his doctoral and postdoctoral education. He has a total of 18 books to his credit as an editor. He has published more than 125 articles. His areas of interest are Pali, Theravada Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, Abhidhamma philosophy, and Tibetan Buddhism. So this session is being chaired by Sir Professor Bimlendra Kumar. So I request Sir to please conduct the session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalpana Jadhav ji. So it is a proud moment for me to preside over this session. I am really glad for this moment, and I am thankful to the organizing committee. So there are two speakers in this session. I am going to introduce the first speaker, Professor Pradyumna Shah Singh ji. He is a professor at the Department of Jain Bauddha Darshan, Faculty of Sanskrit Vidya Dharma Vigyan Sankai. So before joining this Banaras University, he was serving as an associate professor at Punjabi University, Patiala, in the Department of Guru Gobind Singh Religious Studies. Department of Guru Gobind Singh Religious Studies. So he has more than 20 years of teaching as well as research experience in Jain philosophy. He has published several edited books as well as essential books on Jain philosophy. He has presented several papers at the national and international conferences. He has credit to so many works at the international journal and national journals also. So it is indeed a matter of great pleasure that he is going to present his paper on Jain metaphysics. So may I request Professor Pradyumna Shah ji to present his paper on Jain metaphysics. Professor Shah ji.
Very respected Professor Bimlendra Kumar sir, Professor Mehta ji sir, Professor Rahul, and distinguished scholars from all over India and from abroad. This is pleasure to me to be here before you, and I'm going to present my paper on the topic Jain metaphysics. For the better understanding of Jain metaphysics, it is necessary to understand Sat. The term substance is also used as the synonym of the reality. According, according to Umaswati, the reality is known as Sat, that is existence. That which exists is substance. That exists undergoes through origination, cessation, and permanence is Sat, whether it is Jeev or Ajeev. The Jain philosophy is based on two entities. One is Jeev and other is Ajeev. The Jeev is known as soul and the Ajeev has five constituents: medium of motion, medium of rest, matter, space, and time. In this context, an informative conversation regarding universe is between Lord Mahavira and Gandhar Gautam. Lord's reply to Gautam that the universe is composed of five extensive substances such as the medium of motion, medium of rest, space, soul, and matter, make us convinced about the Jeev and Ajeev substance. In this conversation, time is not regarded as a separate substance, but included in both the conscious Jeev and non-conscious Ajeev substance. In some chapters of the Bhagavati Sutra, time is mentioned as separate entity. We can call six dravyas as six substances. One substance is living being, five substances are non-living being. That which has qualities and modes is a substance. Out of these six substances, we can't imagine this inverse. The study of these six substances is known to be metaphysical study of Jainism. The Digambar Jain tradition explains seven tattvas, whereas Shwetambar tradition accepts nine. Tattvas means real. In other terms, it is known as substance. We have four ways to understand the Jain metaphysics as: firstly, we understand Jain metaphysics dividing into two substances, namely sentient being and non-sentient being. Secondly, we understand Jain metaphysics dividing into five substances, five homogeneous continuum, namely medium of motion, medium of rest, space, matter, and sentient being. We leave time because it has no form. Thirdly, we understand Jain metaphysics dividing into six substances, namely sentient being, medium of motion, medium of rest, space, matter, and time. This view says that this universe contains six substances. This includes time as the dravya. Time is not counted under homogeneous continuum because it has no forms. Time undergoes origination and cessation. Therefore, this is substance. Fourthly, we understand the Jain metaphysics dividing reals, also known as principles, into and principles into nine parts, namely sentient being and soul, and non-sentient being or non-soul, virtue, sin, influx of karmas, stoppage of karmas, and shedding of karmas, and bondage of karma, and emancipation. This view has the holistic approach to discuss the metaphysics of Jain philosophy. Soul and non-soul are two ultimate reals. More the influx of karma, tie more the bondage, and more the stoppage of karma, tie lesser the bondage. Virtue and sin both are cause of bondage. Ultimately, the Jain metaphysics focuses on emancipation by wiping out karmic bondage. From Jain ethical point of view, this is the influx of karma, whether it is virtue or sin, both are bondage for the soul. The fruits of the virtuous activities are pleasure, whereas sinful activities are fruits of pain. As omniscient have clearly stated that the aspirant should stop the influx of karma to keep the soul safe even from an iota of karmic influx. The sixth is sambar, the negative condition of the soul achieved by partial or total obstruction of the accession of alien karma matter into the soul. The seventh, nirjara, is the purification of the soul on the expulsion of karma matter from the soul, and thus the soul is partially purged of the continuum included by contamination included by the accession of the foreign matter. The eighth bondage again included by the closed possible association of the soul and karmic matter. The ninth moksha is condition of absolute freedom achieved by the gain of intrinsic purity resulting from the expulsion of the karmic matter and its consequences. The third, fourth, ninth, fifth, and eighth substances are condition of the bond stoppage of karma influx, the transmigration of the soul from the condition one painful existence of other. The sixth and the seventh are the essential condition of emancipation. Thus, last is the most important of all, which is the ultimate goal. There, there is every justification, therefore, for the inclusion of all these principles of ultimate categories. The pursuit of philosophy can't be a barren procedure. Its purpose is to know the truth because the knowledge of the ultimate truth is conducive to the achievement of the perfection. This perfection is constituted by absolute freedom gained by the dissociation of all limitations of foreign matter. The de- detailed clarification regarding five substances, namely dharma, adharma, pudgal, and kal, will be uh, discussed under the non-soul substances, but a study of only materialistic things is not the final goal of human life. The final goal of human life is the salvation and realization of the pure form of the own soul. The study of the non-soul
promote scientific knowledge, whereas study of soul promotes our spiritual knowledge, which shows us path to salvation. Three gems of Jain philosophy. Jain philosophy clearly says that right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct constitute path to liberation. Therefore, combined study of 9 substances has all-inclusive range to cover the Jaina religion, science, and philosophy, moreover spirituality. Let us discuss the 9 substances as we say this as it is holistic approach of Jain philosophy. The applied form of substances. In sequence, the we take first substance, sentient being, soul, as we see it is the form of body. This is great mystery, that how does a jeev promote itself from lower to higher level of spirituality. Second substance is non-soul, that opens the scientific horizon for us to understand the materialistic world. Science and technology and medical inventions and environmental knowledge, all scientific things are understood by man through the minute study of motion and station, space and time and matter in the form of metal, liquid and gases that are non-soul, are very useful not only for human life but for the life of all beings. Third substance is virtue, results to be auspicious deeds. Fourth substance is sin, an outcome of the bad deeds. Fifth substance is influx of karma, asrava, that is caused by the action of body, speech and mind, that is called yoga. Sixth substance is stoppage of karmic influx. Seventh is also known as dissociation with karma, nirjara. Eighth substance is bondage, that is caused by wrong views, abstinence and negligence. And ninth is ultimate goal of soul, that is continuum, that is emancipation, moksha. These 9 tattvas are main parts of Jain metaphysics. These are subdivisions of 3 gems: right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct. Classification of substance from the Sangrahanaya point of view, in it has already been mentioned that if we look at substance from the viewpoint of view Sangrahanaya, universality, we have only one substance, one reality, and that reality is existence. From this standpoint, we make no distinction between conscious and non-conscious, between universality and partiality, between subject and object, between one and many. All these differences are covered by Sat. Hence, the one point of view, Sat is the only substance. This viewpoint leads to a form of monism, as much as it takes note of the third of unity, thread of unity running through plurality, which we find accorded by many others. पानी पानी थोड़ा सा classification and substance from the Vyavharna point of view. This substance, this sat undergoes origination, cessation, and substance that change with the ident that the change with the identity remains ever existent. Ever existent. The distinction between Jiva and Ajiva. Let us see substance from the Jiva and Ajiva point of view. We experience the Jiva is the enjoyer and the Ajiva is enjoyed. In other terms, the Jiva is a consumer and Ajiva is a consumed. That which has conscious is Jiva, that which has not conscious is a Jiva. Dr. Radhakrishnan writes in his book Indian Philosophy that which has not conscious but can be touched, tasted, seen, and smell is Ajiv. This statement is not correct. The real criterion of Jiv and Ajiv is consciousness and non-consciousness, respectively. The Jains say that Jiv is that which which can be touched, tasted, seen, and smelt. These four characteristics belong to Pudgal only, which is Rupi. In other words, it is matter which can be touched, tasted, seen, and smelt because matter gets a form. Ajiv is not only matter, but something more, the medium of motion, medium of rest, space, and time also fall in category of Jiva, in category of Ajiva. The following table clearly shows the real position of Astikayas. Next slide. Substance. This is a category of one is conscious, another is non-conscious. Conscious and non-conscious. Yes. All right. Yeah. G. So substance, conscious and non-conscious. One side there is Jivastikaya with form Rupi and Pudgalastikaya. Other side non-conscious Ajiv means formless Arupi, Dharmastikaya, Adharmastikaya, Akasastikaya, and Adhakal. This is slide is, I think, different. Different. The first slide, then second, then third. There are three slides in this. The first slide I explained, and now about that slide, I'm saying something. The last four categories of Ajiv are formless, hence they can't be touched, tasted. The Jains say that which can be touched, tasted, seen, and smelt is matter, Podgal. Therefore, the four characteristics of form can be ascribed to Podgal only and not to Ajiv as a whole. Pudgal is the part of a Jeev, and it is needless to say there that the characteristics of the part can't be attributed to the whole. The, cri- the criterion of Jeev is conscious while the while the unconscious substance is a Jeev. Canonical conception of the classification. Now it is Bhagavati Sutra. It is Bhagavati Sutra. Substance is classified into two divisions. These divisions are the same as we have already discussed. There is a further classification of the ajiv substance. It is divided into rupin and arupi. The rupi substance is pudgalastikaya. Pudgalastikaya also. Pudgalastikaya alone. The arupi one to divided into dharmastikaya, medium of motion, adharmastikaya, medium of rest, akashastikaya, space, and adha samay is time. The first four ajiv substances, namely Pudgal, matter, Dharma, motion of medium of motion, Adharma, medium of rest, and Akash, space, and Jeev are called Astikayas, meaning, meaning thereby substances having extension. Here it should be noted that the term extension is not used by the Jaina in the realistic sense of material existence. The Jain conception of extension is a unique one. It is as follows. Also they exist, also these exist, they are called asti by the great Jains and by the great Jains, and because they have many pradeshas like bodies, therefore they are called kaya. Hence these are called astikayas, extensive substances. To be clearer, let us understand what is meant by the pradesh. It has been defined to that part of the space which is covered by one indivisible atom of matter, such as pradesh contain not only the atoms of matter but also the particles of other substance, jeev, pudgal, adharma, dharma, adharma, and akash have many pradeshas, as those consist of many individualistic parts. The particles of these are mixed up to capable of being mixed up. The last substance, namely adha samay, time, consists of particle which never mix up, and consequently each of these particles occupies the particular pradeshas. Thus, time is said to have a single pradesh. Therefore, adhasama is not the extensive substance the Ardhasamaya substance is also called Kal. Thus, we can broadly divide substance into three categories. That which is conscious and has no form, Jiv also is such. That which is not conscious and has some form, Pudgal, falls in this category. That which is not conscious and has no form, Dharma, Adharma, Akash, and Ardhasamay are of this category. Another division is also possible. It consists of Astikaya and Anastikaya. That which has more than one Pradesh, whether they are countable, innumerable, or infinite, is known as Astikaya. Jiv, Dharma, Adharma, Akash, and Pudgal consist this variety. That which has only one Pradesh is called Anastikaya. Such substance is Ardhasamay or Kal alone. And now the following table will clearly show the scheme. Substance, yes, this is substance. Here is conscious. Substance, one side there is conscious, that is Jiv, and other side non-conscious, that is Ajiv. Further division of Ajiv is material and non-material, and non-material is of four kind: Dharma, Adharma, Akash, and Kal, and material is Pudgal. In this way, other table is substance, extensive, non-extensive. Non-extensive is Kal, and extensive is Jiv, Dharma, Adharma, Akash, and Pudgal. Almost all realists of Indian thought exist the Naiyayikas and Vaiseshik divided reality into two broad categories. These categories are known as spirit and matter, soul and matter, ideas and matter, Purush and Prakriti, are subject and object. The materialistic school of realism is not included in this scheme because it is not dualistic. None of the realistic tried to divide reality exactly in the same as Jainism did. So far as consciousness, so far as, yes, so Jainism holds that there are not only two categories of reality, namely consciousness and matter, but there is a third category which is non-material but non-conscious. It should not be forgotten that matter is that substance which has form, that is which can be touched, tasted, smelled, and seen. Dharma, Adharma, Akash, and Kal are non-conscious but not material. They can't be touched, tasted, smelled, and seen. To sum up, there are six substances according to the pluralistic conception of the Jainas. They are as follows: Jivastikaya, extensive; conscious non-material substance. Pudgalasticai, extensive non-conscious material substance. Dharmasticae, extensive non-conscious non-material substance in the form of the medium of motion. And Adha Samay, extensive non-conscious non-material substance in the form of the medium of rest. Akashastikaya, extensive non-conscious non-material substance in the form of space. Adhasamay call non-extensive, non-conscious, non-material substance, that is time. The references, these are books, and this is the paper. Thank you.
So thank you. Now the paper is open for discussion, questions and comments. If you have, you can ask. Yes, Mindranath friend.
Yes, sir. It was very nice paper. And I wanted to ask because there are many opinions related to our own self. So related to the human beings, in which category we should put ourselves? We should include our body and say that we are conscious and in the matter also, or we should take into consideration only our own soul and say that we have no matter and we have consciousness. That is my question.
Thank you. Very nice question you have asked. As Jainism says that without body, soul is not visible. Soul comes into contact with body when it becomes visible. In this way, soul is the main thing and body is like a sword and जिसे तलवार और म्यान कहते हैं. तलवार means sword remains in myan. So body works for, that is the body is materialistic, of course, and all the materialistic component, materialistic organs, they are helping and they are giving station to our soul, and soul exists in that body. And the concept of emancipation is when we leave this body, and if we do not come again into this body, that is emancipation. Because all the Shamanic tradition, whether it is Buddhism or Jainism, both accept that this world is dukkha. But they are optimistic in the same time when they say there is a marg, there is a way, path for liberation, from get free from this kind of bondage of worldly pains. So in this regard, Lord Mahavira is very clear because he is known to be omniscient, having Keval Gyan and having perfect knowledge. Whatever he stated is acceptable by the all agamic literature. There is a huge literature based on Mahavir Bani. Mahavir is last Tirthankar. So he stated, Lord Tulsi used to say, कि sharir and soul, body and soul. In this regard, he has a very, very prominent verse शरीर जो है मिट्टी, शरीर सोना है और मिट्टी से मिला जुला पर आखिर सोना सोना. So in this way, this is the gold and intermingled with the clay, and clay is body and gold is our soul. So that is why soul is very important to understand, and if that is pure, that is pure, and for the pureness of soul, we should do each and everything. When we perform any wrong activity, our soul gets contaminated, soul gets polluted. In this way, Jainism always say that we should always try our best to keep our soul neat and clean. So this is a very fundamental statement of the Jainism, is soul, and that is why the practice of non-violence is given priority in life. If we harm other, at the same time, our soul also get hurt. That is why it is very important we don't disturb to others, because that in return our soul gets polluted, gets hurt. This is.
I think her question was that where we can put consciousness in the realm of the sattvas. You were discussing about that. When the roop, you were discussing that there are 6 types of substances. So where we can put our consciousness in those our dravyas or the substances. If you have any clear directions, you can tell.
Yes, yes. Means there are 7 or 9 substances I have stated in this paper. The first is Jeev, and Jeev is known to be soul. And other components, whether it is Ajiv or Asrav, Sambar, Nirjara, and Moksha, whatever I have stated in my paper, are for the help of this soul. If we want to get emancipated, so we should practice at the same time Samvar and Nirjara for the freedom, for the wiping out karmic bondage, karmic assertion with this soul. So all these Sambar and Nirjara are practices for purifying our soul.
Any more question or any comment?
Sir will tell about the Buddhism, I will tell about the Jainism. Both people. And we, Buddhism and Jainism, both are.
Of soul. And what in the race of soul we are having consciousness. We can purify our consciousness. That Buddhism talks about the Visuddhi, which is our in place of guilt.
Now I would like to say to Mr. Rajan. Mr. Rajan, your question is very appropriate, because sir says that there is chitta, concept of chitta, consciousness. I also said in my paper consciousness. So there is consciousness. Without consciousness, nothing is possible. But very important thing is on metaphysical ground is कि Buddhism says the four noble truths: dukh, dukh samudaya, dukh nirodh, and dukh nirodh gami marg. For whom? For whom? For chetana, for consciousness. The same thing is here also. The soul, and soul becomes under pain, and for removing this pain we should try to samvar and nirjara. We should try to samvar and nirjara. That makes us free from all kind of sorrows.
Professor, just a minute. Professor Balram Singh ji. Professor Balram Singh.
Maybe mind, maybe chetana, maybe other aspects of our existence at the level of whether it's an astral body or mental body or whatever. But Atma itself is pure. It cannot be polluted. But you referred couple times.
In this regard, what your sir has stated very clear is that there are a type of karmas and our soul is veiled in a type of karmas that are known to be Jnanavarniya, Darshanavarniya, Vedaniya, Mohaniya, Nam, Gotra, Ayusk, Antaray, etc., etc. So we people having this materialistic body are also have soul that is contaminated because of a feeling of attachment and aversion. When we remove such kind of attachment and aversion and become free from all these type of bondage, then our soul is in pure form, and that condition is is condition of the omniscient. They always removed all the veils from their soul and get that supreme stage that is known to be omniscience. The omniscience soul is free from all kind of, I think, this type of pains and pleasures.
Uh, my question is, the center philosophy of Jain is metaphysics. So my question is, how, if the center of the Jain is metaphysics, how we can justify that the soul is there?
The soul is?
Soul is there without body.
Soul is pure. Yes, yes. Soul is pure or clear without without yes. The concept of Jainism is that there are numerous souls residing over Siddha Shila. Mr. Rajan had showed you last day Paraspara Upagraho Jivanam. There was a Bindu on upper level. So that is known to be Siddha Shila. So if one body gets free from this karmic bondage, gets emancipated, never comes into existence having this materialistic body. And that place is in Jainism known to be Siddha Shila. There such type of omniscient souls are existing, and they get the company of those souls which never come into this world, this materialistic world, which is full of pain and such type of non-violent activities people are involved. And that is place known to be Siddhashila.
Actually, Professor Balaram ji was asking about that whether soul, if the souls are pure, how they are contaminated, and how by the nature the souls are pure, how they are being defiled. So this was the question by our Professor Balaram Singh. But in Buddhist traditions, our consciousness is pure, even pure by nature also. And it is called in Anguttara Nikaya Pakati Pavastaram Idam Chittam Tamcha Ko Aguntukehi Upkilesehi Upkilittam. That our by nature our consciousness is pure, immense pure, and it is being defiled by our incoming inward defiling factors, the klesas. Even the souls which we are discussing about, these are being defiled by incoming inward defiling factors. The klesas, due to the klesas, this is being defiled. But in Buddhism, coming to this, our consciousness being defiled, the being is also become in suffering also. That is why it is called a chitta sanklisanti. That due to this, our defiling factors, a person is being defiled, and whenever these defiling factors are removed, a person becomes emancipated, and he becomes he gets a state of eternal bliss. So that is in the same way we are having the concept of Jiva in Jainism, and they are also by nature immense pure, and they are being defiled by their incoming inward defiling factors also. Yes, sir.
How the definition that you are given, how it's possible that if the soul is a pure, the cause and effect are there to form the soul? How can we say that the soul is the pure? But if that karma is formed through the cause and effect, so how it can become a pure?
So I just wanted to ask that, I mean, Jainism and Buddhism, they focus on non-violence. So like, how do you explain that in this current in a situation of carbon footprint of like, non-violence? It's just like, like they focus on the direct violence. You become a vegetarian and that's enough, I guess. But what about how you explain in a case of this current scenario of carbon footprint, of how everything that you do is creating a carbon, I mean, footprint, which is all in all, destroying the planet right now. So how do you explain that? Because it's a very non-direct way of violence, actually. I mean, the way I see it. So how do these Jains and Buddhists, like, they explain that? Is it just important to just being vegetarian, or like,
All the problems, just to clarify, all the problems that we have within us, whether I'm lying or I'm greedy or I'm angry, I know. You may not know that. I may be able to figure it out a way to tell you that I really don't like you, but I'm saying, well, it will be very nice to have you in a different dress or something. But I know that I'm lying. And that the one who does not lie, does not get angry, just but observes everything. Each one of us can do this. We don't need to go to sit in Himalayas to do this. Each one of us can feel that what I know, what is right or wrong and everything, and who is that witness? Is the soul or Atma, which does not get affected, because if it got affected just like a mirror or whatever, we will not be able to see it. Since we know we see it, we know we have it. And that's what I meant. I'll walk down there.
There are three queries raised from distinguished participants. First of all, she has stated about the relation of soul and body and how soul gets purer. In Tattvartha Sutra, there is a sutra, Samyak Darshan Gyan Charitrani Moksha Marga, Tattvartha Dhanam Samyak Darshanam. Tattvartha Dhanam Samyak Darshanam, Tannisargad Adhigamad Va. The third sutra is very important to answer your question. Tad Nisargad Adhigamad Va. In previous life and afterlife, so in previous life, you have earned a lot also, and because of your previous earning, you are able to get something better than other people who are not able to find position on which you are, In this way, you can understand that you have something earned, and that is why you are now able to understand this level. And from this level, you are to go then superior level also. It is important. And for this, you will have to accompany to those people who are having that superior kind of knowledge, are those scriptures who are the statements of those persons like Mahavira, etc., who are omniscient. And why we accept the Vani of Mahavira and we are not accepting Vani of a layman which is not knowing about the soul and its purity. So we honor the Vani of Lord because he practiced in his life a lot. And the statement of Jainism is very important. In Tattvartha Sutra, there is a verse, first I will recite in Prakrit language, then I will explain you. जे सहस्रम सहस्राणम संगामे दुजय जिणे एगम जिणे जय पाणम is से परमो जवो. The person who conquered whole army, entire army, and did not conquer himself is not true conqueror according to Jainism. But the person who conquered himself is the true conqueror. It means the Sanyam, self-restraint, is very important according to Jainism. First Nij par Shasan, then Anusasan. First you be disciplined, then the imposed discipline on others. So in this way, this depends on the self-restraints and the self-disciplined manner that Jainism has told us, has. And see, the vegetarian and non-vegetarian, according to her, it is very important. Jainism has very clearly stated one sensed jiv and two sense organs jiv, three sense organs jiv, four sense organs jiv, and five sense organs jiv. So these banaspati, which we shark and path, whatever, has also jiv, but they are one sense organ, having one sense organ. And two sense, if one animal is butchered wherever, so they are all are five sense organ jiv are. So there is a lot of sin, and that sin contaminates our soul. So we should have violence as minimum as possible. As minimum as
So we are lagging behind the time also. So there are a lot of things which can be discussed in this paper. But yes, Professor Mukund Mehta ji.
Actually, I think very fundamental questions were asked by Professor Balramji and by you also. Within a minute, I would like to just present a framework of the whole Jain metaphysics. See, it is started from Kaya Vang Manah Karma Yoga. Now, yoga word there, that has a technical meaning, not that Chitta Vritti Nirodha Yoga, not that meaning. Here it is act of mind, body and speech. That is yoga. Sa Astrav, that is the cause of influxing of karmic matter towards soul. Astravo bhav hetu syat, that astrav is the cause of bondage. Then samvaro moksha karna. Samvar means to check the influx of the karmic matter towards soul is the cause of liberation. Of course, nirjara is there. Nirjara means with your heart practice. If you assassinate the karmic matter from the soul. And then ultimately separation of soul from the body. That is liberation. Now that is equally like it is believed Sadeha Mukti and Videha Mukti. If we go to the basic Namokar mantra of Jainism, they say Namo Arihantanam. Arihantanam means one who has eliminated all kinds of enemies. Now what are the enemies? That Raga Dveshadi karma. Passions, Kashaya. Then comes the second is Namo Siddhanam, what you were asking and sir has answered also. There is a concept of Siddhashila. Jainism believes not only in this lok, but Jainism believes in other loks also. And at the top of this lok, it is believed that there is a place called Siddhashila. Now, since you say that a soul is eternal, then after liberation, that soul needs some place to live. So that's why it is believed that after liberation, soul moves vertical and then it reaches at the end of this lok, the final place of this lok, the boundary of this lok, where a place is called Siddhashila, and after liberation. And also Jainism believes in plurality of soul. Plurality of soul, Jainism believes. So it believes that all the liberated souls, they reaches ultimately to the Siddhashila, and then they live forever there. So, and then definitely there are several stages of spiritual development in Jainism also. They talk it like Bahiratma, Antaratma, Paramatma, or 14 Gunasthan they have talked about. So that will be, I mean, that is what Rakesh Chandraji is not here. We were planning to have an independent seminar on Jainism next time, so that things may be much more discussed and elaborated in that seminar. Anyway, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mukul Raj Mehta ji. So we are lagging behind the time. I think second speaker, Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh ji is online. Before I request him, I will like to speak about him. Dr. Rakesh Singh is an assistant professor with 5 years of experience, and at present he is teaching in Zakir Hussain College Evening, New Delhi, University of Delhi. He has an MA in philosophy from University of Delhi, where he has topped the university. He has done MPhil and PhD in the philosophy from Jawaharlal University, New Delhi, where he worked on some important issues of continental philosophy. Earlier, he taught at Jawaharlal Nehru University, MIT Institute of Psychology and Allied Sciences, and some other colleges at the University of Delhi, like Satyavati College. So he is going to present his paper on Quine's naturalized epistemology and Jainism. May I request Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh you to present his paper, and I also request him to present his paper within 20 minutes. Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh ji.
Thank you. I'm audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Thanks to the organizers, especially Rahul, who gave this opportunity to interact with, to take feedback from these esteemed scholars there. It was because of different problems I couldn't come there to take benefits from different presentations. But I hope that this time I would be able to take some feedback. I was planning to speak on Quine's naturalized epistemology and Jainism, a study from philological perspective. But I talked to some persons there and to take feedback on some new topic I'm writing on. I'm in the process. So I would like to speak on slight different topic, and this is the possibility of ontology of silence. And the topic is mind, temporality, and language. Taking help of phenomenological and analytical method to study its transcendence and an attempt to see the possibility of the ontology of silence. So that the point is that I could take some feedback from esteemed teachers there, and I would be very brief, like presenting things in sutras only. See, as Professor Mehta was saying, I was listening to Professor Mehta, that we have to pass through mind, body, and speech, he was talking of. So in the same way, I was thinking that how is this silence possible, the ontology of silence possible? Of course, we have to pass through mind, time, and language. Mind is a help. but mind also comes as problem. Mind becomes distorted also. Psychological hauntings are also there. And that's why Edmund Husserl proposed this suspension of, this reduction of psychology. The psychological association comes as a problem. And when we try to see through the analytic of Dasein, the term given by Martin Heidegger, Dasein, the being there, then we'll find that mind has three kinds of associations. One is ontic, means towards the world, and second is ontological, that from the world towards the existence, towards the feeling of the existence, towards the intensity of existence, and third, the ontological mode of thinking. So I propose here, I want to say, I'm thinking, I would like to take feedback from all of my teachers and the scholars, that how to transcendent this distorted mind. So I'm writing here that there is a need of death of distorted mind. So from the ontical association, that is important, we cannot run out of this. It's important to be there, but the intensity should be turned towards ontological and finally towards the ontological. And when we try to go towards the bottom, towards the deep foundation, which itself is unfoundational, we find that silence is again out of reach because there is trapping of time. Time is there as help because we cannot do anything without time, but time also comes as problem. Like sometimes we try to embrace the truth, but we are in the past, trapped with memory, with the associations of memory. And many times truth passes away and we cannot see the truth. We cannot embrace the truth. So memory also sometimes comes as help, but sometimes as problem. Many things are there. How to make the path of silence? So here I would like to bring again some methods to see time. Like when you go to Kant, Kant says time is the like pure form of, it is the pure form of intuition. It is something the basic for the epistemological possibility. But I am trying to see different possibilities also. Of course, epistemological possibility which Husserl brings in his work Ideas. He is talking of static notion of time. Self is the spring of time. Self is the spring of time. It constitutes time. But it is also, later on, many scholars found it very narrow. That even Husserl, Edmund Husserl, makes a departure from that notion of time. Husserl goes to different notion of time. It is constitutive notion of time. That we constitute time, we are in the time, which is intersubjective world of time, intersubjective domain of time. But again, we have to go somewhere in the deep. And Husserl again makes a departure when he writes European Crisis. Then he goes to transcendental notion of time, transcendental historicity he brings. And there he finds constitution of time. But I want to go with here, of course, Martin Heidegger, who talks of genetic notion of time. Time which comes with the notion of history. But history not in the sense of historicity, but history in the sense of historicality. So temporality comes with historicality. But when we try to find something in deep from the foundation, which itself would be unfoundational, the intensity should be turned from the realm of consciousness to the realm of nothingness. The nothingness, which is very rich, the nothings. It is without any presupposition. It is without any hypothesis. It is without any fixed essences. And when we try to find that realm of silence, of deep possibility, the rich possibility, I would like to bring here some lines of Anaximander. Anaximander writes in his fragments with the help of some words, Greek words like kreon. Kreon is handing over the deep, that rich possibilities handing over to the individual, kreon. And in this dwelling of this deep possibility and the individuation, there is possibility of becoming. But here again, the third problem comes, the conception of language. After my time, I find that language comes, as I would like to say, that language is, of course, is a big help, but language also comes as problem. If our conception for language is of different kind, it might be speech, it might be something which makes speech possible. So we don't speak a language, but language makes us to speak something. So we have to understand that speech is not, we should not be confined to this notion of speech. Rather, we should go to the notion of language. Language, but what will be the mode of this transcendence from speech to language, and from language to that language which is the house of being. So it's important to again introspect the notion of temporality. Temporality, as some scholars have mentioned, that temporality is also of different kinds, with a small t and capital T. So I would like to say here that if we move towards the capital T temporality, where events become possible, where happenings become possible, so that would be the possibility of ontology of silence. But there also deep observations is needed. Deep observation is needed. And there we have to also think that our mode is reflective or pre-reflective. So again, we have to come towards the pre-reflective mode of thinking, where we can embrace deep silence, the possibility of the ontology of silence is there. So with this, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh ji. Now, this paper is open for discussion. If you have any question, you can ask. Any question? I think the House does not have any questions. So, on behalf of organizing committee of the Department of Philosophy and Religion, I pay my sincere thanks to all these two speakers, Professor Pradyumna Saha Singh ji and Dr. Rakesh Kumar Singh ji, for presenting their own papers. So thank you very much. We are lagging behind the time also. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you, sir. And now you all are invited for lunch, and next session will be started at 2. Okay. पहले सेशन तो पता ही है इसके बाद